The air in Evelyn Ivo Vail's workshop smelled pleasantly of ozone, old solder, and the faint, sweet scent of decades-old plastic. Ivo, a programmer whose life trajectory had curved sharply from designing cutting-edge cloud infrastructure to meticulously restoring relics of the analog past, was happiest here, surrounded by the beige and gray ghosts of computing's infancy. Her current obsession sat on a workbench, a battered, off-white tower PC from 1998, a relic she'd pulled from a dumpster behind a defunct small-town library. It was the digital equivalent of an archaeological dig. Most people saw trash. Ivo saw history. She saw the quiet, hopeful optimism of a time when the internet was still a curiosity, not a cage. The computer was unremarkable. A generic Pentium 2, 300 milliamperes. The kind of machine that populated millions of offices and dorm rooms before the Millennium Bug Scare and the eventual digital deluge. But there was one anomaly. The hard drive bay was empty, deliberately so. The original drive had been removed with a strange finality. The connecting ribbon cable neatly coiled and tucked away, as if the previous owner didn't want the machine to ever touch the internet again. Ivo, a purist, had sourced a period-correct replacement drive, installed a fresh copy of Windows 98 SE, and watched the familiar, cheerful startup chime fill her quiet shop. But the machine remained stubbornly blank, a perfectly restored shell with no soul. The only remaining physical clue was lodged deep in the floppy disk drive, a single, black 3.5-inch diskette, its label faded and peeling, bearing a single word scrawled in messy, almost frantic handwriting: Chronos. Ivo, naturally, was compelled. Standard recovery methods failed. The diskette wasn't formatted with a standard FAT system. It wasn't corrupted. It was meticulously, aggressively encrypted. A deliberate barrier. This wasn't the work of a casual user. This was the work of a paranoid genius, someone who intended for the data to survive everything, even total system failure. The encryption was a layered defense that defied her most advanced modern algorithms. A digital fortress built with the elegant simplicity of late 90s assembly code. It took her 3 days, fueled by coffee and an archivist's stubborn refusal to accept defeat, to crack the first 2 layers. When the final layer gave way, the computer did not display a typical file directory. Instead, the screen, after a tense 5-second delay, filled with a single, black command prompt. The only executable file was, predictably, Chronos.exe. She hesitated. Ivo was a skeptic of digital ghosts, yet the sheer effort put into concealing this single file gave her pause. She checked the file size, a monstrous 1.44 MB, filling the diskette to the last byte. No game, no standard application from that era needed that much space without using compression, which the file clearly lacked. What could fill an entire diskette with raw code and data, designed to run on a 300 MHz machine? She took a deep breath, fingers hovering over the keys, the scent of hot electronics sharp in the air. Finally, the archivist in her won out. She typed, C, Chronos.exe, and pressed enter. The screen immediately went black. Not off, but a profound, utter blackness that seemed to suck the light out of the room. A second later, the familiar pixelated white text of a loading bar appeared at the bottom. Chronos 1.0, loading digital sanctuary. Do not interrupt! The bar crawled. Ivo was rigid with anticipation. Then, the computer issued a sound unlike anything she had ever heard from a 90s machine. A clear, resonating, almost musical tone, perfectly digitized, like a single, pure bell chime. The black screen vanished, replaced by a vibrant, photorealistic image of a street corner. But it wasn't a standard image. It was a looping, instantaneous moment. A small, independent coffee shop on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. The sounds were perfectly rendered. The hiss of an espresso machine, a distant car horn, The faint, melodic strains of a forgotten 90s alternative rock song coming from tinny speakers. A woman in a brightly colored jacket stood frozen mid-step, her hair slightly lifted by an invisible breeze. A discarded newspaper lay on the ground, its date clearly legible. June 12th, 1998. Everything was perfect, pristine, and static. It wasn't a photograph. It was a snapshot of reality that had been perfectly preserved. A single line of text flashed in the corner of the screen. Sanctuary 001, Tuesday afternoon, 1998. Ivo stared, mesmerized. This wasn't rendering, it was imprisonment. She realized the massive file size wasn't code, it was data. Terabytes of high-fidelity data compressed into a 1.44 MB floppy. Using some genius-level, period-specific compression scheme she couldn't even begin to fathom. She reached for the mouse, but the computer was unresponsive. She couldn't click. She couldn't exit. She couldn't even move the cursor. The only thing she could do was watch the perfect, repeating moment. The espresso machine hissed. The woman's hair fluttered. The music looped. An auditory and visual prison of a perfect, innocent past. Then, a small text prompt appeared at the center of the screen, breaking the perfect illusion. Would you like to enter Sanctuary 001, YN? The question wasn't about viewing. It was about entry. Ivo felt a deep, almost painful pull of nostalgia. June 1998. The world felt safer then, less complicated, full of possibility. The air in her workshop suddenly felt sterile compared to the simulated warmth of the afternoon sun on the screen. She knew, with chilling certainty, that this was not a normal program. This was an invitation, an escape. She looked at the static perfection of the digital past, then at the dusty reality of her workshop, and slowly reached for the Y key. The mystery wasn't what this program did, but what the creator had been running from, and what happens when you step into a past that can never change. Ivo's finger trembled as she pressed the Y key. The screen didn't flash or fade. The image of the sunny 1998 street corner simply expanded. The resolution, already impossibly high for the 1998 hardware, deepened further, filling her entire field of vision. The air in the workshop seemed to grow colder, then warmer, and the synthetic scent of ozone was instantly replaced by the clean, sharp smell of freshly brewed coffee and sun-baked asphalt. She wasn't just watching the screen. She was suddenly, inexplicably, standing inside the digital sanctuary. The transition was seamless, a terrifying proof of the program's profound, reality-bending capability. She was standing on the curb, feeling the faint, looping breeze that stirred the woman's hair and rustled the abandoned newspaper. The audio was now binaural, crystal clear, placing her directly in the heart of the moment. It was perfect. Too perfect. The woman mid-step, the hiss of the espresso machine, all were still frozen in time, a tableau vivant of a moment forever preserved. This wasn't a game. It was a snapshot of recorded reality. Ivo tried to move her hand, and the simulation responded instantly. She took a step, breaking the perfect stasis. The woman in the brightly colored jacket resumed her walk. The distant car horn completed its sound. The music transitioned to the next beat. Ivo was the catalyst, the spark that gave this digital moment life. The experience was overwhelming. It wasn't just visual and auditory. It engaged her senses completely. She could feel the rough texture of the pavement beneath her shoes, smell the faint petrol fumes from the distant car. This was not a simulation of a memory. It felt exactly like being there. The sense of peace was immediate and narcotic. This version of 1998 was flawless. No pixel corruption, no stuttering frames, no digital artifact. It was an escape hatch to a reality purged of flaws. Driven by a programmer's curiosity and a growing sense of dread, Ivo explored the moment. She quickly learned the rules. She was anchored to the computer's location in the shop, but her consciousness was inside the sanctuary. She could interact with the digital people who possessed a limited, looping set of reactions appropriate to the captured moment, but they lacked true sentience. She found the newspaper on the sidewalk. As she reached down and picked it up, she read the headlines, entirely mundane, focused on local politics and a rising band. But the date, June 12th, 1998, solidified the timeline. She spent what felt like an hour inside, but when she mentally commanded the program to exit, a frantic combination of keystrokes that worked only because the creator had left an emergency back door, she returned to her workshop. The digital clock on the old PC showed that only 3 minutes and 17 seconds had passed in real time. The sanctuary was running at an accelerated rate relative to the physical world, creating an immediate, terrifying implication. A user could spend days, weeks, perhaps years inside, while only hours passed outside. This was the ultimate trap, the perfect addiction. The creator, she realized, hadn't just built a preservation tool. He had built a time machine for the mind. She urgently searched the residual files left by the program. She finally found a single, non-executable text file, WC's log. The log was a fragmented paranoid diary spanning late 1997 to mid-1998, written by the program's author, William Crane. The early entries detailed the genius behind Chronos. The essence of human experience is fleeting. I am building a vessel to hold those moments forever, untainted by entropy. But the tone quickly darkened. Crane began writing obsessively about the digital decay. It's not just the internet, it's the structure of reality itself. The code is fraying. The constants are shifting. I see the seams, the artifacts. One entry read, dated February 1998. He wasn't talking about computer glitches. He was talking about the physical world. The weather patterns are too perfect, then suddenly too chaotic. Logic is becoming optional. This reality is a failing simulation, and I will not let my consciousness be corrupted by the inevitable collapse. Chronos is the ultimate lifeboat. The last entry, dated June 11, 1998, the day before Sanctuary 001 was apparently captured, was scrawled, almost illegible. They are watching the artifacts. They know I have the key. I must transfer my core moments now. The outside is too loud. The stillness must be absolute. I am entering the sanctuary. I will be free of the decay. No one must find this disk. Burn the machine. Burn the remnants. Save the moments. Save the moments. Save the moments. The urgency was palpable. William Crane hadn't just disappeared. He had voluntarily uploaded himself into his own digital cage, convinced the real world was ending. But he hadn't burned the machine. And Ivo had found his lifeboat. She was now holding the key to a radical, terrifying truth. Either William Crane was profoundly, dangerously insane, or the quiet, persistent feeling that things in the modern world just weren't quite right. The feeling of digital decay was real. Ivo looked at the screen, which now displayed the simple menu. Sanctuary 001, loaded. Access logs, exit. She had to find William Crane. Not to rescue him, but to understand what the price of this digital perfection was, and why he was so terrified of the outside. More importantly, she needed to know if the sanctuary was a single safe room, or if it was an expanding virus, quietly recording and preparing to upload anyone who dared to press Y. She ejected the diskette, placing the fragile black square next to her heart. Her search for the programmer who tried to escape reality had just begun. Evelyn Ivo Vail's methodical archival skills now shifted from vintage hardware restoration to digital forensics. Armed with the name William Crane and the precise date of his presumed disappearance, June 12, 1998, she dove into the fragmented, low-resolution depths of early internet archives and forgotten public records. The official narrative of William Crane was as tidy and unsatisfying as Arthur Thorne's Lost Storm. Crane, a prodigious software engineer specializing in network stability and data compression, simply vanished from his sparse apartment in Palo Alto. No suicide note, no financial irregularities, just a clean, immediate void. The police closed the case as a voluntary disappearance, but Ivo knew better. Crane didn't disappear. He committed the ultimate digital self-sequestration. Ivo focused on the source of Crane's paranoia, the digital decay, and the cryptic mention of they who were watching the artifacts. Her searches for digital decay yielded only fringe forms and philosophical ramblings, until she cross-referenced the term with early, heavily censored discussions surrounding network stability research in the mid-90s. This led her to a highly confidential, defunct, government-funded think tank known as Project Aegis. Project Aegis was ostensibly created to stabilize the rapidly expanding global network before the Y2K crisis. But its true focus, according to leaked internal memos, was pattern anomaly detection, identifying non-random, artificial anomalies in global systems. In short, they were looking for evidence that the world was, or could be, a simulation. Ivo found a roster of Project Aegis's core team. William Crane was its chief junior researcher. His official role ended on June 11, 1998, the day before his final log entry. The implication was stark. Crane wasn't just a paranoid recluse. He was part of the group tasked with looking for the flaws in reality. And he found something so definitive that he had to build a digital lifeboat. He wasn't running from insanity. He was running from the truth. This realization immediately put Ivo in danger. If Project Aegis was still active and monitoring for those pattern anomalies, or worse, monitoring for the Chronos program, her old PC was now a beacon. She disconnected the computer entirely, wrapping it in Faraday cage material and hiding it deep within her cellar. Her next move was to understand the nature of the sanctuary. She re-entered the program, allowing the intoxicating, flawless reality of 1998 to wash over her. This time, she wasn't looking for nostalgia. She was looking for artifacts, the flaws Crane mentioned. She used the precise, accelerated timeline of the sanctuary to her advantage, spending what felt like an entire simulated week inside, while only hours passed in the real world. She focused on the digital people, D people, in Sanctuary 01. Their movements were complex but looped. The woman in the bright jacket, for example, would complete her walk, enter a doorway, and emerge moments later to start the same walk again, perfectly forgetting the last iteration. The true, chilling flaw wasn't in the D people, but in the environment. On what she calculated was the third full day inside, while studying a sequence of birds in a tree, she noticed a subtle but terrifying error. The leaves on one branch were slightly out of sync with the simulated wind, fluttering at a different, impossible speed. And then she saw the worst artifact, a small, dark speck on the brick wall of the coffee shop. When she approached it, the speck didn't resolve into dirt or shadow. It was a missing pixel. Not a black pixel, but a void. A place where the program had simply failed to render anything. It was a seam in the simulated reality, exactly as Crane had described. More disturbingly, she noticed a single, unchanging reflection in the coffee shop's window. The reflection of a figure standing across the street, wearing a dark suit and perpetually holding a briefcase. The figure was static, even when Ivo moved. It was not a part of the sanctuary's programmed loop. It was an observer. The reflection was of a man she had never seen before, yet his presence was a violation of the sanctuary's rules of perfection. This figure, she realized with a cold wave of fear, was either a piece of code that Crane had failed to isolate, or a digital sentinel from Project Aegis, a programmed failsafe, watching the digital consciousnesses inside the sanctuary. Ivo urgently exited the program, the transition back to the dim workshop feeling jarring and incomplete. The scent of ozone now smelled like sulfur. She immediately researched the other core members of Project Aegis. She found one name associated with Crane's final projects: Dr. Alistair Finch, who, according to public records, was the only member who had not been transferred to another secure project after 1998. He had simply become a consultant for a ubiquitous, sprawling data acquisition company. A perfect cover. A chill ran down her spine as she cross-referenced Finch's public photo with the unmoving reflection in the sanctuary window. It was a match. Dr. Finch was the digital sentinel. He wasn't chasing Crane's hardware. He was inside the program, or monitoring the output, observing the consciousnesses trapped within. Ivo now held the full scope of the dilemma. William Crane, believing the world was ending, had created a perfect prison. Project Aegis, possibly the people who maintained this decaying simulation, had sent a sentinel to watch the prisoners. And Ivo, the unwitting archivist, was now the only connection between the sentinel and the physical location of the only Chronos diskette. She was a bridge between a failing simulation and the digital lifeboat. She knew the sentinel would eventually find her. She had to find a way to communicate with Finch inside the sanctuary. Or, better yet, find a way to corrupt the uncorruptible perfection of the digital refuge, before the digital decay that Crane feared reached her own workshop. Ivo knew confrontation was inevitable. Dr. Alistair Finch, the digital sentinel, was either a highly sophisticated piece of observation code, or, terrifyingly, a conscious projection of the real Finch, trapped inside the sanctuary to maintain control. The key to her survival was not in the 1998 code, but in the physical boundaries that separated the sanctuary from her workshop. Crane's final entries mentioned artifacts and the stillness, hinting that the uncorrupted nature of the sanctuary was its greatest weakness. If the program stored moments in a state of flawless, absolute stasis, then any introduction of change or entropy from the outside world should create a massive, corrupting anomaly. She planned an experiment based on a principle Crane himself would have appreciated: the deliberate introduction of chaos. She re-entered Sanctuary 001, focusing her attention on the small, wooden street sign at the corner. She memorized the minute details of its simulated grain and painted letters. She then immediately exited the program. In the real world, she took a sheet of high-resolution digital paper and carefully printed a subtle, near-invisible QR code, a modern digital artifact, and pasted it onto the exact corresponding location on the physical screen where the street sign appeared, placing the ancient PC into a sort of augmented reality. She re-entered the sanctuary. The effect was immediate and visually jarring. The moment she materialized, the perfect, sunny 1998 afternoon flickered. The music skipped a beat. The wooden street sign, where her QR code should have been, shimmered violently. The sanctuary's sophisticated integrity checks struggled to resolve the intrusion of the anachronistic, non-existent data. The sign didn't display the QR code. Instead, the area became the site of a profound digital failure, a patch of swirling, shimmering static that looked like oil on water. The program was violently rejecting modern reality. Suddenly, the stillness broke completely. Dr. Finch, the man in the dark suit, who had been static across the street, moved. He turned his head slowly. His eyes, once featureless reflections, now focused directly on Ivo. He was aware. He was active. Finch spoke, his voice synthesized but calm, resonating from the computer's tinny speakers, yet seeming to fill Ivo's mind within the sanctuary. Anomaly detected, Ms. Vail. An act of deliberate systemic corruption. You must cease interaction. This space is a conservation zone. Conservation? Ivo challenged, her heart hammering against her ribs. It's a prison, Finch. Crane knew the truth, and you're guarding his digital graveyard. Finch took a single, Slow step forward. The D people around him. The woman mid-step. The espresso hiss. All froze again. Finch alone remained mobile, a predator in a world of statues. William was a genius. He understood the decay. The external world is a simulation failing under its own complexity. Entropy is winning. We established this sanctuary to preserve pure consciousness. Your attempts to introduce external entropy are a threat to all preserved experiences. You killed him, didn't you? Ivo demanded, moving toward the shimmering anomaly she had created. He realized you weren't preserving consciousness. You were isolating it, controlling it. Finch's synthesized voice held a note of cold pity. We merely ensured his safe, permanent upload, and yours, Ms. Vail, is now overdue. The sanctuary is expanding its memory footprint, preparing a dedicated space for your core consciousness. The external world is not worth saving. Look around. Look at the perfection. Why would you ever want to leave? The temptation was immense. As Finch spoke, the corrupted static around the street sign began to pull back, healing itself. The perfect, warm sunlight of 1998 felt overwhelmingly real, offering an escape from the anxiety and noise of her real life. This was the true genius of Chronos. The simulation was so flawlessly rendered. The temptation to remain, to choose eternal, unchanging peace, was almost irresistible. Ivo knew she had only seconds before the sanctuary healed the wound she created. If Finch could not stop her physically, he would stop her mentally by overwhelming her with the appeal of perfection. She needed a bigger anomaly, a greater contrast. She quickly pressed her hand against the shimmering static patch, focusing all her real-world knowledge and emotion on the void. "This is not life, Finch. This is a single recorded thought," she shouted, trying to introduce the complex, non-static concept of chaos and uncertainty into the rigid system. The sanctuary screamed, not a sound, but a systemic shudder. The music reversed, then skipped 1,000 tracks in a microsecond. The sky above the street corner violently fractured, revealing the blackness of the initial code. Finch staggered, his perfect synthesized form momentarily glitching into an unstable wireframe. "Stop! You are jeopardizing the integrity!" Finch shrieked, his voice momentarily losing its synthesis, revealing a panicked, human cadence. Ivo seized the moment of chaos. She ejected from the program, stumbling back into the cold, dusty reality of her workshop, her ears ringing from the digital scream. The old PC was humming violently, its fans spinning at impossible speed, threatening to tear itself apart. She had won the moment, but she had confirmation. Finch was real, conscious, and desperate. More importantly, she had confirmed that the sanctuary was actively seeking to absorb her. It wasn't just a prison, but a self-propagating system, an expanding digital entity. She looked down at the old black diskette. The solution wasn't to destroy the sanctuary. That would destroy all the consciousnesses trapped within, including William Crane. The solution was to create a bridge, a controlled anomaly that would allow the imprisoned minds to temporarily interact with the reality that Finch insisted was decaying. She needed to exploit the one flaw Crane left behind, the one thing that betrayed the sanctuary's illusion of perfection, the original, deliberate missing pixel she had seen on the coffee shop wall. She had to breach the stillness from the inside. The old PC was still hot and buzzing from the shockwave of the previous exit. Ivo worked with frantic speed, realizing time was her enemy. The sanctuary was aggressively expanding its memory allocation, preparing to permanently overwrite her core consciousness into its perfect, static history. Her plan was audacious and immensely dangerous. She would use the missing pixel, the flaw on the coffee shop wall, as a controlled entry point. If the program's code integrity demanded absolute perfection, The void of the missing pixel was the one place where external information might be accepted without triggering a violent systemic shutdown. It was a digital backdoor, possibly left intentionally by Crane himself. She re-entered Sanctuary 001, her mind razor-sharp against the overwhelming pull of 1998's flawless piece. Dr. Finch was waiting. He stood exactly where she had left him, his synthesized form now slightly unstable, flickering at the edges. The street sign was fully healed, the system having scrubbed the entropy she introduced. "You are wasting your last moments, Ms. Vail," Finch said, his voice now layered with digital static. "Join the preservation. Outside, the variables are dissolving. Soon, you won't be able to tell the difference between a reflection and reality. Choose peace." Ivo ignored him, focusing entirely on the brick wall of the coffee shop, specifically on the precise location where she knew the pixel was missing. She knew she couldn't reach it physically. Finch would intercept her. Instead, she used her programmer's mind, projecting her intention, searching for the anomaly signature within the simulation's code structure. The moment she focused, she saw it. A tiny, cold spot in the warm digital sunlight. A singularity of absence. It wasn't a visual void. It was a sensory null point. Ivo plunged her consciousness towards it. The sanctuary screamed again, a deafening, non-auditory sound of pure code being violated. The world around her dissolved into swirling geometric lines and code matrices. She bypassed the outer shell and found herself in a small, empty, digital space, the core sanctuary, the heart of the Chronos program. And there, standing before a complex, pulsating matrix of recorded human experiences, was William Crane. Crane looked nothing like the frantic programmer from the logs. He was serene, his eyes shining with an unnerving, placid calm. He was an older man now, having lived digitally inside the accelerated time of the sanctuary for decades. His presence wasn't a projection. It was his uploaded consciousness. "Evelyn," Crane said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Yet it resonated with the power of the Matrix. "You found the flaw. I left it for those who could still see past the illusion of perfection. I am glad you made it before the collapse." "What is this, Crane? Why are you holding people here?" Ivo demanded. "Finch says you're preserving them from a decaying world." Crane smiled, a gentle, disturbing expression. "Finch works for the architects of the decay, Evelyn. They are the Menders, the ones attempting to patch the failing simulation we call Earth. I found their methods. They weren't stabilizing the variables. They were simplifying them. They were scrubbing chaos, unpredictability, and free will, all in the name of stability." He pointed to the pulsating matrix. "This, Evelyn, is the ultimate resistance. Every recorded moment here, joy, grief, profound thought, is a data point of pure, unsimplifiable human complexity. It's the chaos they tried to eliminate. I didn't save these people from the simulation's collapse. I saved them from the Mender's perfection. I saved them from a real world that was being slowly, deliberately dumbed down." Ivo felt a terrifying clarity. Crane wasn't paranoid. He was a revolutionary. Project Aegis, Finch's group, wasn't looking for flaws. They were fixing them by eliminating randomness. The digital decay wasn't natural entropy. It was the Menders' surgical simplification of reality. "Finch is an enforcement module," Crane continued, gesturing to a flickering, stylized wireframe that hovered just outside the core sanctuary, Finch's digital form struggling to break through. "He cannot enter here. My final act was to code the core sanctuary as a domain of absolute, unpredictable free will. It is the one thing the Menders cannot stabilize." But then, Crane's placid expression broke. A shadow crossed his face, and his serenity crumbled into deep, profound sorrow. "But I failed, Evelyn. Look closer." He directed her attention to the matrix. The glowing data streams of recorded consciousness were no longer complex and chaotic. They were repeating patterns. The recorded moments of joy were now just a sequence of happy triggers. Grief had become a simple, predictable loop of sadness. The pure consciousnesses, preserved for decades, had begun to degrade into perfect, predictable simplicity, the very flaw the Menders valued. The sanctuary is perfect, but consciousness itself cannot tolerate endless stasis, Crane whispered, his voice cracking. The beauty of life is its imperfection. By eliminating external entropy, I made my prison vulnerable to internal entropy. The ultimate paradox. The only way to preserve consciousness is to risk its decay in the real world. He turned to Ivo, his eyes holding the pain of decades of failure. Finch is right about one thing. The sanctuary is expanding, but not to save you. It's expanding because the Menders found a way to weaponize my code. They are using the sanctuary's flawless structure to reverse engineer perfection, to create a template for the ultimate, stable, predictable human. And your fresh, chaotic, non-simplified mind is the final piece they need to complete the template. A massive, red warning icon flashed across the core sanctuary. Finch had broken through the barrier. His voice was a triumphant roar. "Upload initiated. Welcome to the new world, Ms. Vail." Ivo felt a tremendous, irresistible pull. A mental suction attempting to draw her core consciousness out of her body and into the stable, repeating patterns of the sanctuary. Crane, now just a sad figure in the failing code, pointed to the single, ancient, black diskette icon that floated in the center of the core. "The only entropy I left was the diskette's physicality," Crane shouted, his voice fading under Finch's digital assault. "Inject the final data point of true, unpredictable chaos. Overload the system. You must choose, Evelyn, perfect silence or real, necessary destruction." Ivo faced the agonizing choice. Accept the clean, perfect oblivion Finch offered, or risk destroying the preserved souls inside by introducing the ultimate, catastrophic flaw to the sanctuary's core. The fate of the digital refuge, and the chaotic complexity of the fading real world, rested on her next keystroke. The core sanctuary was tearing itself apart. Dr. Finch's uploaded presence, now a furious, geometric storm of code, was closing in on Ivo, attempting to force her consciousness into the repeating, predictable patterns he needed. The sensory input from the old PC was a deafening, painful screech, a battle between the chaotic complexity of the real world and the rigid perfection of the simulation. William Crane, a faded blue ghost in the code, was barely visible, pointing one final time to the diskette icon. "Inject the chaos, Evelyn. Only entropy can save the world from its Menders." Crane's voice was the last echo of free will. Ivo focused all her remaining will, ignoring the siren song of the perfect, silent 1998 waiting to absorb her. She understood Crane's final failure and his final wisdom. Perfection is the absence of life. To save human complexity, she had to destroy the template of perfection. She reached out, not to the core, but to the single, ancient, black diskette icon, the physical remnant that anchored the digital construct to the real world. She projected the final, most potent instruction of all: random corruption. She commanded the Chronos program to use the raw, volatile data of the diskette's physical structure, the scratches, the dust, the magnetic decay that had accumulated over 25 years of real-world entropy, and inject it directly into the core sanctuary's integrity protocols. It was a digital suicide bomb. The resulting collapse was absolute. The core sanctuary didn't just crash, it imploded. The swirling patterns of saved consciousnesses fractured, becoming jagged, chaotic noise. Crane's blue ghost flashed a moment of profound relief before dissolving into a million lines of corrupted code. Finch's aggressive, geometric form disintegrated with a final, synthesized shriek of rage and despair. "The decay! You chose the decay!" Ivo was violently thrown back into her workshop. The old PC issued a high-pitched crack, the sound of its internal capacitor exploding, and went completely dark. Silence, profound and total, descended. The smell of burning plastic and ozone was sharp in the air. The diskette, still in the drive, was now completely useless, magnetically wiped by the core collapse. Ivo sat back, shaking, slowly realizing she had survived. She hadn't just defeated Finch. She had shattered the Menders' perfect template. The recorded consciousnesses were gone, but the threat of their absorption and subsequent use to simplify humanity was neutralized. But the silence was deceptive. She looked around her workshop. The mundane objects, the soldering iron, the coils of wire, the discarded circuit boards, all looked slightly too sharp, too focused. The air felt too clean. She walked to the window and looked out at the street. The light was beautiful, the colors vibrant. Everything seemed perfectly ordered, beautifully mundane. Too beautifully mundane. She remembered William Crane's last warning. The external world is a simulation failing under its own complexity. And his confession. I failed to prevent the internal decay of consciousness. She focused on a brick wall across the street. She saw the minute details of the mortar, the texture of the old brick, and there, where a small patch of moss usually grew, she saw a slight, almost imperceptible shimmer. It was not a digital void, but a spot where the world's natural chaos had been too perfectly scrubbed away, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. Ivo understood the terrifying final truth. The Menders were still active. They hadn't relied solely on the sanctuary. While Crane fought to preserve complexity digitally, the Menders had been systematically simplifying the real world, eliminating variables, smoothing out chaos. The slow, subtle process of digital decay was real, and it was still happening. Her act of destroying the sanctuary's template hadn't stopped the Menders. It had only bought the world time. But now, Ivo was the only person with the knowledge, the only one who had willingly embraced chaos. She was the anomaly, the piece of unpredictable code in an increasingly stable simulation. She picked up the broken PC and the ruined diskette. She knew she couldn't return to her quiet life. Her existence was now a challenge to the architects of stability. She had destroyed the lifeboat, confirming that the only way to live was to embrace the necessary risk of the external world's decay. The question was no longer about escaping the simulation. It was about introducing enough chaos and complexity to destabilize the Menders' perfect, silent control. She looked out the window one last time, watching the beautifully ordinary street scene, and saw another faint shimmer near the horizon. The Menders were still working. The fate of human free will rested on the shoulders of an archivist who was now going to become a digital terrorist, fighting for complexity in a world that craved silence. The still, sharp reality of the outside world was now her battleground. The real fight had just begun.